Last week we had demos from Zoltan, Dean, and Antoine. Antoine was just Facebook admin update. Zoltan, what was it? I should watch the recordings. What was Zoltan's demo? I don't remember. And
the UI kit, UI testing toolbox.
Oh yeah, UI testing toolbox. Yeah, Selenium based. Yes, I remember. And Dean, was it about tenants profiles? Profiles. And maybe also JSON schema stuff.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. Today. Demos. Topics. Demos. No demos. Demos. Topics. Questions. Comments. We'll see. Status first. Orchard 1. Orchard 1 since 21st. Here we merged. So this is a PR that has been merged, but the branch hasn't been deleted. Added null checks. So very simple things I assume. Null checks in projections. Yeah. Cloning doesn't overwrite identity. I thought we had talked about it last time. Fixing a bug with identity when you clone. Interesting. Orchard core. Is there a PR waiting? I saw a comment. Yeah, for caching for roles, there is a PR going on to cache output caching based on roles. Orchard core, 28, 21st. What happened? So this is my branch. This is a branch also. So here, or if I filter on main, it would be better. Always confused by these two because it's an hide, but it's actually to hide. Like it's to see, and this is to show only. So that's weird. So main 21st, we have mkloc updates, removing unnecessary role attributes, removing unnecessary role attributes. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what it's used for. I thought it would be for Bootstrap, but apparently it's useless. Jean-Thierry, preserve browser autofill for bag. So PR that was created some weeks ago, and the goal is to fix autofill for bags. So changing some naming conventions in the JavaScript and in the HTML, I assume, such that it's more stable across visits, no more grids, because you see before it was generating grids to name stuff and to prefix stuff for isolations. And now it's more stable, so I assume the browser can store stuff across navigations. Fix login optimal. The only concern I had with that is to be careful that it's not breaking anything with bags and flow parts when it's recursive, because the naming is very important for updating fields. this case. Fix logging of the notification message. I see this one will be a toString of the type, so this is the value that needs to be added. New contributor relation, update to NodaTime, minor updates, Cypress, super minor, and Cypress because not so minor, and 1 hour passed and there was a new release. Cool. Yeah, so Jean-Philippe, if you missed last week's demo, Zoltan said Cypress is useless. Let's use whatever they are doing. Another library. It's another library above another library. And it's in C#. Interesting. So, questions about that? For demos? I have one thing to show / talk about. Anything I've been working on actually. So, pull request. Ooh. Templates, Monaco updates, Gint updates. This I've been working on, net 60 by default. So what I'm trying to do here is to ensure that it's working with .NET 6, because it will be really soon and we'll have to target that also. What is that? Oh, this is the script under the workflow, the GitHub actions. So what's interesting here is refactoring of the main dependencies.props file. What I try to do here is to rename the variables to make it so that they make more sense, and I think I wanted to do one more change actually. So here first, it's what we have is default target framework not 5.0, and we have that for 2 reasons. So this tag is used for 2 things. First, it's used here to set what framework we target when we are in Visual Studio. Because if we don't do that, it will build in Visual Studio for Net 5 and 3.1. Okay. If it does it in Visual Studio, it's becoming super slow. I haven't tried with the latest Visual Studio, but with 2029, it was super slow to harmonize the projects because I want to target. It was much faster when we limit to 1 target. And usually that's what we want to do. There are some inconveniences if the code is not portable, but usually it's fine to target 5.0 in Visual Studio. It's much faster. So this is used for Visual Studio, and it's also used by some project that can only target a single TFM. For instance, the templates, when we generate them, we want the web app templates to target a single one. We don't want a web app to target 2 TFM. Doesn't make sense. So it's fine for packages that will be reused, but for end user apps, we need a single one. So this tag is used by for 2 different reasons: for the default in Visual Studio and for standalone apps. So we have that, this default target framework. And then we have, and I kept the name here. What I did though is add condition here so that when you set the value on the command line, it will use the one in the command line and not the one here. Before that, it will always use this value, even if you don't set it in the command line. Now, if you set it in the command line, it will use it. So it says, take this value, 6.0, only if there is no value right now. Then I rename this thing ASP.NET Core Target Frameworks because it doesn't mean anything. It's actually the target framework, and I call it Common Target Frameworks because this is the one that we put in most projects. Like all the packages, they will target all these frameworks. So this is what we want here. And what I'm seeing again is, oh, this won't be the last value. It was just for testing in this case. So here it will be multiple values, but I just wanted to have just one single, just so that it was faster in Visual Studio also. and on the command line. So this one will have default target plus 50 plus 31. So net 6, 50, and 31. Or we can draw the 31 if we decide to. So that's the first thing. And then we, as a reminder, we need the ASP.NET Core package version and Microsoft Extended package versions, specific versions, so we can point to NuGet packages based on the TFM we are targeting. So for each TFM, we have different versions, and these ones are updated continuously by Antoine. And that's about it. I call them Microsoft Extensions packages versions. Okay, and ASP.NET Core packages versions. So that, and then it's just renaming, updating templates. And that is a main change also, because so in .NET 6 there is a breaking change, which is that is not required anymore, and it's false by default. So we can set true, but it also requires that, and that is required but also sufficient. So we don't need that tag if we have that tag. Okay. And so here what I'm saying is that if it's not 6.0, it's set to true, because you don't need that in 6.0. Big change, and that's the main interesting point here of the discussion, is that in .NET 6 there is no more dynamic compilation. So that is for dynamic compilation. Dynamic compilation is when you change a CSHTML, it will dynamically compile the CSHTML when the file is changed, and then when you hit F5, it will reload the file. Okay, so that's dynamic compilation, and that's for CSHTML. In .NET 6, it's not necessary anymore. That's why they removed it by default in the templates, because they have something called hot reload, which works for CSHTML and also for standard C# files. And it works the same way because now CSHTML files are pre-compiled, but also they are compiled using a source generator, so it's much easier for them to integrate in the hot reload pipeline. So now, whenever we change a CSHTML or a C# file, is the same thing that happens. .NET will detect it, and also if you are in Visual Studio and debugging, or even not debugging, but if you are in Visual Studio, it will not only detect it, but it will refresh the page as you change something. So if you change a CS file or a CSHTML file, it will reload the page. So that's interesting. And that's why I'm setting .NET 6, don't do that, because it's not necessary in .NET 6. So that's why I want to do that. And I had to do that because when I tried to make it work in .NET 6, it didn't work. So I didn't know why. And that's fixed by doing that. There were some conflicts because of the TFM and because of the fact that that is defined. The fact that this is defined will cause issues with hot reload. So that's why I removed it. And then just updating with the export files. So that's the only change I made I can talk about. Comments? New websites to demo, even if they are in Greek. No new website. Okay. Questions? Technical questions? Discussions?
Well, I have a question. Well, more of a, I'm wondering how to do something. So I've been developing a site that requires a lot of tables, so kind of like listing content in the front end. And I know we have the list part where you can attach it to a kind of like a container, and you have a list and a container. But is there an easy way to do the same thing without the list part? So I don't need the RSS feed, and I just want a list of content that's not in the list part. Is there an easy way to do that built in right now?
Trying to understand. So when you say you have a lot of tables, you really mean front-end tables of stuff?
Yes. So like I have let's say an experiment, and I want to list all the experiment with the search box and the pagination and everything. But
So-
the experiments would not be inside of a list, a content item with a list part.
Okay, but these are two different issues. There is the content model, which is the list part, a list, a collection of stuff.
Mhm.
And there is the rendering, because I could render all my blog posts in a table, right?
Mhm.
Today it doesn't do it by default, but so is this the issue about the content model or just the rendering as a table? Is your experiment a content item or not?
Yeah, it's a content item, but it's not contained in any list.
Oh, I see what you mean. So it's more like projections in 1.1 where you could say, oh, give me all experiments and render them in a table. Okay, so
with pagination, hopefully.
But you still want pagination. I see.
Yeah. So I was wondering if there was anything for that, or if you have any recommendation, or if I should build a feature for it.
That's interesting because the feature would only provide the pagination, or because the table, what columns do you display in the table? Like you could always render the display text, and I don't know. I don't even know what's common to everything, but
well, it would for this particular one, it's for a single content type, so we could have like custom field displayed. But you could also make a table where you just have common fields or common parts, and then display those together.
This is something we talked about actually for importing data. How do we, like tables, but for importing, like you want to import a lot of data with CSV or by typing lots of stuff, and then you say publish, and it publishes 10 items at the same time. And the issue we had, which is common here, is it will mean that each part or each feed will have to define a template for this view to be custom, so that it provides an out-of-the-box experience, and that's hard.
Yeah.
A solution to your thing might be that what you want is paging and filtering and executing a query. So it might be based on the query module, and then it would be like a feature from the query module or dependent on the query module that would be able to render something based on a query and could pass paging and filtering, sorting parameters to the query, and then users could be able to define the template for a table, for a row, for instance, in this case, for the header and for a row. So let's say you have like a view. Let's call it a view module, not like a projection module. It's like the projection module, but let's call it a view. And then you will render it will execute the query, and you would be able to define a template for each of the views based on the name of the view, like view header, view footer, view row. And this way you could customize how the table is rendered for each of them using a shape. And that way the pager would be reused across all your views. That's a way to do that. Another more direct approach would be to just create a razor page and just load the data and render it as a table and handle the paging by yourself. That's a different, that might be more straightforward and less risky.
I'm trying to do it with many different content items, and it's very similar. And many apps as well have that kind of like the need to list content. So
yeah, maybe there's a way to reuse some things in this case. Yeah.
Okay, so in 01 it was projection. Yeah,
it was projections, and then you could decide, hey, do you want to have a list or a table, and then you could define which fields you wanted. But we easily reach a limitation because, oh, this is not what I want to render, or I want to render a custom thing, so you have to use tokens to. So I think it's better to just accept the fact that it's limited and just say, okay, you can just provide a template and do whatever you want. Instead of having a lot of configuration,
Yeah,
and still be limited at some point, just say, okay, there is a default table, there is a default shape. You can change the default shape for everything, or you can provide a custom shape.
right. So you could have alternates for each content type row.
For each, I would say for each query, for each view.
Each view.
Each view, because when you are in a view means query plus custom templates. So let's call it a views module, not a projection module. But a views module will let you, oh, let's create a view. There is an auto route, so you can give it a nice route. And in the view part, you select the query you want to execute from the queries module. Okay.
Right.
And at that point, when you go to this auto route, you get a table.
Okay.
with or list, whatever. You get the list of the queries with a pager. But that's super simple, just a title and a link to it, done. But then you can customize for this view using the alternate. The header, the items, and the footer. And it can be just divs, but it can be also table TRTD. So then you can decide, oh, I want my view to render a table, or I want my view to render a list. I want my view to render thumbnails. It's just your template for each item and for the whole thing.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense.
And this could also be part of the view part itself, the templates. You might not have to define a shape for that. You might just say, oh, the view part has a template for the header, footer, and content. So this is like a technical thing. The same way we wanted to implement route table stuff, or it's like a liquid page. Imagine a liquid page. Mm-hmm. Okay, just have a route and a liquid page, but you could have a view be like a liquid page. You have a route and you have 3 templates for the footer, header, and item.
Okay.
And then you might even be then the pager also can't be configured. So this one might require alternates because usually the pager you want to reuse it across views, but the views might be different in what they render. But all the views might use the same pager. I assume that's what you want. Usually when you have a pager, I mean, the pager is common to every pages.
Yes.
They look at feel and everything.
In this app, they would be look all the same, just the header change and the columns change, right?
So yes, the pager could have an alternate for the views module. So you could configure the views or also for each view, but at least by default you will reuse them. So you don't need the template for the pagers. You can just provide a template for the header, footer, and item in the view part, which is auto routable and which has a query property.
So one other thing that I was wondering when thinking of this feature was, is it okay to have a mix of content like a query in the admin and templates in code? Like, is that a good practice? I mean, I know I did it before, right? But isn't that hard to maintain long term?
What do you mean template in code?
Well, because the templates with the alternates would potentially live in your code base, right? Your module or not?
What I was suggesting here was that the view part has a field called header template, item template, and footer template. So it's part of the content itself.
Okay, so you define all that in your
view part.
In the view part.
I think that's the most coder friendly in this case because, well, admin friendly, not coder friendly. Admin friendly. You say new view, you give it a URL, you select the query that you already built in the queries module, and then you have 3 text areas where you can type liquid, for instance.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And if one other feature I wanted to add was a Lucene integration, so you could have a search. I guess you would point to the same thing. You do another query with parameters, or maybe the query that you reference when you're doing a search could be a Lucene query.
Yeah.
And
could have a parameter for the view that is used in the query, maybe to bind the query string of the URL.
Yeah,
to a parameter of the query. That might be something else to do, actually.
Yeah, something like that. Like the page would be in the query string and maybe some text to filter.
To be able to filter, yeah, the query, because you will need to be able to do that. Yeah, that's kind of hard because then, it's so generic, like have a table. Which fields do you allow for sorting?
Exactly.
And which fields, and do you want a filter, for instance, like a search box or a drop-down list, or like ranges and stuff like that. So that's why sometimes it's super specific, so you can't really have a feature to do that. Or you do a feature that does the generic thing, the common things, but whenever you need specific things, you have to go to the code now and create your own razor page.
Right. Okay. So you would suggest to do that when it becomes too complex. For my use case, it's still very simple. So that might work. Okay.
Yeah, that's why it might be necessary to keep it simple, because it can be complex. If you try to let people think they can do everything, they can't do everything. So they will be stuck. They will go this way and then they will be stuck at some point. So that's why sometimes it's good to say, okay, we can do that, and that's it.
Okay.
Pass custom arguments on the query string and they will be passed to the query by their name and done. That's it.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much. That helps me. Been thinking about this one for a little while.
So next week we have a demo. That's great. That's an investment to get demos.
I hope I'm done by that time.
But that would be a super nice idea, because imagine when you want to create, for instance, a calendar. It's kind of the same thing, right? You have a content items named like event, that's date time. So you do a query on that and you want a custom view to display that. Like organized in as a calendar. It's just you have a footer, you have a header, and you have items that are grouped.
Yeah. Easily create a custom calendar. Yeah.
So we have a question for Sotiris, but it's in yellow. So let's see. Does anyone have publishing? Oh. Did you file the issue? It might be an issue with Orchard. It might be an issue with ASP.NET. I know there is a bug that was fixed recently in ASP.NET with encoding. It's better now. Thank you. Yeah, file an issue and we'll look into that. People will be able to repro and debug it to see where it's coming from.
Okay, because I didn't know if it's an issue of mine or if it's general, I will file an issue.
And
Definitely.
the fact that it happens locally is better for us, because if it's just on Azure, I'm like, but, oh, it doesn't. No, it's just on Azure.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a bug. That's probably a bug that was fixed in ASP.NET recently. I will talk to my colleagues. Azure came back to us with an issue and the path encoding bug in Azure that is due to Kestrel, actually. So it might be that. I will come back to you, because we have an open issue and there was a fix that was proposed to Azure, and I'm not sure they deployed it. They might have deployed it already, but I'm not sure. It's a fix in Azure, but due to a Kestrel issue. So they have a custom patch for that. It's due to IIS, the way IIS is encoding the path, and then it's passed to Kestrel, and the Kestrel tries to encode them again, and then there is double encoding.
Yeah, it's something about the local redirect, I think. So.
Okay. So yeah, please find an issue on GitHub, and yeah, I'll try to see with my colleagues if that's the issue, or find why it's happening only on Azure.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Don't use Azure, use something else.
Is it an advice?
I'm not recording, right? That's I'm kidding. No, I just I'll check with them what they say. Maybe it's an issue in Orchard that only appears in Azure because of this encoding. I'll check. So if you can give us a repro, I try that. Thank you. Awesome. Other questions? Well, 30 minutes, that's good. Thanks everyone. See you next week and on Thursday for the triage. Bye-bye, thank you.